You're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, What's Going On. It comes on 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock every Monday. And every 2 Mondays, we have a program that follows this program that comes on at 3:30, Satora's Black History Corner. I hope you'll stay tuned for that today. This is the second Monday of the month. And they will be coming your way from 3:30 to about 4 o'clock. And we'll be here to keep you entertained, hopefully, and informed for the next hour. I want to always thank you for tuning into all the programs here at FlintTalkRadio.com, because I can assure you that every one of the programs we broadcast from this studio, we're trying to do our very best to bring you the kind of information that you can take away and chew on. And hopefully there's some entertainment involved in it as well, because we understand that it's just a need for every once in a while a ha-ha moment, because of all the tensions that are out there that are wreaking havoc upon a lot of our lives, and we need some place to take out stress. And we hope you'll bring some of that here, and we'll hopefully be able to manage it for you in the time that we're on the air. You can catch this program anytime from, we tape it at 2 o'clock and for about an hour from 2 to 3. But the program can actually be caught anytime at your leisure on your computer by just dialing in Ustream on FlintTalkRadio.com, and we are happy to have you aboard at that time as well. And we list all the programs, by the way, that they have on the Flint Network, and you can simply go back and see some of the earlier programs as well. And we hope you will, in fact, tell your friends about what we do here. Today, Monday, the 9th of September, 2 days away from the 12th anniversary of 9/11, we're going to be talking about the issue, at least for one half of the time we have it this afternoon, talk about the issue that is, in fact, riveting our attention to what Washington is going to do. And we'll see what happens tomorrow when the president speaks. Where he's giving a rare talk before the cameras and before the American people, laying out his premise for why we should, in fact, in essence, go to war against Syria because of the alleged chemical attacks that they unleashed over there by the Assad government on the 21st of August. And I am one of the persons that is one of the skeptics that want to see the evidence. And so far, I am not one of the ones that have seen evidence that convinced me that the chemical warfare that was waged on the 21st of August was really waged by the Assad regime. We're going to talk about some of the quote-unquote evidence, and hopefully we'll be able to put something on your mind about why it was that the president, who, if his intent is a limited strike against Syria, why he did not go ahead and do that, because all of the pundits are saying that he had the authority to, in fact, take an action, military action against Assad, given the alleged use of chemical weapons. I'm not at all convinced that's true. In terms of the president can just go off on his own and commit the armed services to a state of war without the compliance on the part of the Congress, which I think that is very clear that they have the war-making a declaratory power to declare war, and the president has therefore own up to his responsibility, which is to prosecute the war once a declaration has been made. But as far as the president can on his own launch the country into war without the tacit approval of Congress, that is not constitutional, although it may well be legal given the passage in 1973 of the War Powers Act. And we need to talk about sometimes that which is legal does not mean that it is constitutional. And I'd like to see a test case upon the constitutionality of the law of the Congress being able to take its constitutionally ascribed responsibility and pass it off to the President of the United States and have him therefore act in his name, so that it is not the Congress any longer that's actually making the decision to go to war, but it's in fact the President of the United States who therefore would have a dual responsibility, one which is to take the nation to war and then prosecute the war once that occurs. I think that is clearly a question to be raised, and I'd like to see somebody raise that question. I'm going to talk about why the President, though given the War Powers Act and his ability to act under it, legally at least, not necessarily constitutionally, why the President opted not to do that. And I don't think that this has been said anywhere else, so you're going to hear it here for the first time. And we're going to try to put our understandings of it and invite you into the conversation at area code 810-208-1854, the number here at the studio. And feel free to join the conversation if you want to add anything to what we'll be saying here this afternoon. What I'm going to say primarily about the reason why the President decided to hold off and seek the approval of Congress before he took any military action, which really was in his purview to do based upon what we said here earlier about the War Powers Act, which gives the President limited authority to engage in war, provided that there are certain things that go along with that, such as a limited amount of time that you're involved in the war, checking in for further approval if it goes beyond a certain point for Congress to authorize it, and things of that nature. So the President pulled back at the last minute, and he surprised a lot of people in terms of not going ahead and taking military action. Peter King, the representative from New York, actually said the President should have gone ahead and, this is before the President threw it in the lap of Congress, said the President had the authority to go ahead and do it. And he was almost begging the President not to put Congress on the spot by coming to Congress with it, because they have an election coming up next year. And I'm sure a lot of the congressmen did not like the idea of being put on the spot, where they have to now either listen to their constituents and then face the wrath of the voters in 2014, or in terms of the Democrats at least, go in support of the President despite what the constituents are saying about whether or not the country should be involved in this war or not. And I think that unenviable position, many of the members of Congress would not want to be put into that kind of position, and they wish the President had gone ahead and taken all of the heat, because the President can't run for a third term, and these persons are up for re-election. Every member of the House is up for re-election in 2014, and 1/3 of the Senate, 33 or 34 members of the Senate, are up for re-election. 1/3 of the members that are housed are there of the 100 members of the Senate. And so there's some baggage here that they have got to look at in terms of maybe in the Democratic Party in particular want to endorse the President in his actions or any actions that he would purport to take. At the same time, they got to pay attention to what those polls are showing, because when I hear Elijah Cummings, a member of the congressional, what Rush Limbaugh calls the Congressional Caucasian Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, when I hear Elijah Cummings saying that his constituents have given him pause because all of the phone calls into his office, they have the same numbers that's calling his office as calling these other offices about how they feel about getting involved in even a limited war, let's known a protracted war in Syria, and the numbers are astronomical against this going into Syria on any level, whether boots on the ground, whether the war is in fact limited, whether they're just going to lob some Tomahawk cruise missiles over there, or whatever the situation is. The people do not want a third engagement, and some say a fourth engagement, but certainly a third war in the last 12 years, and they just are not having any of it and don't want the U.S. involved on any level of that. So the president put a lot of people on the spot by going to Congress. If, and that's a big if, his intent was to, in fact, prosecute this war on a limited basis and did not necessarily, therefore, need the approval of Congress based upon the War Powers Act to seek input from the Congress if that was, in fact, the intent. We're going to talk about why the president changed his mind, something I don't think anybody else has brought up, because I think we can put some things together here where 1 and 1 will, in fact, equal 2, and we can ferret out what is really going on in terms of why the president took this circuitous route to war in Syria. And I'm going to say later on whether or not it is likely that the president will carry this war forward. If Congress says no, we'll have to get to that before the program is over as well. We're not going to spend the whole hour on this, but I do want to spend some time on it before we get to something that happened yesterday, or day before yesterday, with the resignation of Ben Jealous, the president of the NAACP, who announced this weekend that he'll be resigning from his post on December the 31st, and will be stepping down, and said he will be seeking a job on the college level. So we will have a chance to discuss that as well. But let's start out with talking about what everybody's talking about and what's on all the American people's minds, and that is, what is our role, if any, going to be in terms of going into Syria on any level to confront Bashar al-Assad on the alleged use of chemical weapons that on the 21st of August in a suburb of Damascus, 1,429 people, 400 of whom, according to the reports, were children, were killed as a result of what is alleged, and I want to use the word alleged here very deliberatively, was ordered by the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. That is really quite a, if that is true, that is quite amazing in and of itself, because you have to then go and talk about what is the military stratagem in place, and also what is the military advantage that is in fact gained by just simply going out there and gassing children. I mean, this is really something we need to look at. Gassing people for the sake of gassing them makes no sense from a military standpoint, and I think the administration knows that. And I think that's why they sent Kerry out there to tell us that Assad is equivalent to Adolf Hitler. I don't know if you mentioned Genghis Khan, but this guy was all the evil people that has ever existed wrapped up into one, and he's sitting over there in Damascus, just massacring people for the sake of it. Otherwise, it makes no sense to, in fact, bring down the wrath of the international community in a war that he's in fact winning, based upon routing those rebels that are in there fighting what they claim was a civil war. A civil war, but I'm told there are 1,200 or more different units out there fighting the civil war. As I said on my Facebook wall, we had a civil war in this country from 1861 to 1865, and ask yourself this question: how many different sides were in that war? Is a civil war. So how many factions that you have in that war? We had two, and they were declared as being the North, which would be the Union states, and then the South, which would be the Confederate states, 11 of them. So it wasn't 11 different factions. It was one faction that was outside the Union, trying to leave the Union. One faction that had left, they formed a single polity called the Confederate States of the United States, And then you have the Union states, the 22 states that stayed in the Union, 4 of which were slave states. And those two factions fought what persons say was a civil war. And even that's a little bit off the mark, because civil war is a war for power. So it is a war for power in Syria, but civil war would mean the people inside the sovereignty of Syria are the ones fighting the war, and we know that they're outside agents in that war. And that is something that they're trying to play down. But you can't have 1,200 factions involved in a war, different factions in a war, and that'd be a civil war. You just would not have all these different elements. You would have the unity of them rising up against the common foe, and whatever you would have as far as this separatist kind of thrust, where one person in this room, another person over here, another room on the battlefield, that would be something you would hash out after the war is over. But right now, you'd be in a single unity that is, in fact, fighting the war. You have to have a common, leader, and under that leadership, you'd be able to singly focus your military upon the machinery that you're fighting against, and that is not what we see in Syria. We see that those factions are fighting under their own umbrellas, and that means that some of those forces, and what numbers we're talking about is not clear, but certainly a significant number of those forces are from the outside of their country. So this is called a civil war, but it may not necessarily be a civil war. It looks like we have a large faction of Al-Qaeda in this war, and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the umbrella of all those radical groups, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, the ones under which Al-Qaeda is fighting, which is the Sunni, the Hezbollah that's over there on the side of Assad, those are the Shiites. So in some sense, it is a religious war. It's a war of the interpretation of the Quran by warring factions. And it's not surprising that the Sunnis are being supported by Saudi Arabia, meaning that they are supporting the rebel group. And I noticed when the president talks about the funding, John Kerry was saying that the finance, which was another issue that we had in terms of who's going to pay for it and how we going to pay for a war when we have already accumulated a $17 trillion debt. I noticed that John Kerry was happy to tell the American people and tell the Congress committees he was going in front of that the Arab nations, he didn't mention any nation other than Saudi Arabia, but the Arab League is willing to pay for this war. And that would mean then that we, in this country, our military has been hired as mercenaries to carry out the will of an outside sovereign nation or group of nations that are outside the will of the United States. Let's back up and talk about, before we get to all of the other things, let's talk about the very beginning of this process in terms of why the president decided to go before Congress when his first stated intent was that a red line had been crossed by Assad that this president had drawn. And President Obama, you drew that line on the 20th of August of 2012. You're the one who said that if we see chemical weapons moving around or those weapons being used, then that would be for me, these are your words, for me, that a red line had been crossed. This is not the world's red line. This is a red line that the President of the United States is drawing. And President Obama, you are the President of the United States. Congress didn't draw that line, nor is there any public statement that Congress made that a line would be breached if, in fact, those chemical weapons were used. That's what you singularly said as the executive officer of this country. And you can't pass it off and say, oops, I didn't say it. Not in this time period when we have photographic evidence, we have video evidence, we have internet evidence. With all the multimedia that you spoke into, it cannot be denied like it could have been maybe at some point when you only had the print media and you didn't have necessarily people listening in on what was actually said. You can always say you didn't say it and the reporter had it wrong in those cases, but when you have the situations we have right now, where there's multimedia involvement, and all of them are in fact covering it and reporting the same thing, then the deniability is a lot different than it would be under other media circumstances. I mean, this is 2013. So the president drew a line in the sand and then made what looked like the attack on Assad inevitable, only to pull back from the brink and involve Congress in a discussion about it. Now, the question is, why did that happen? And I think we have figured it out here at flinttalkradio.com, and that is the report that the Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, MC, capital D-O-N-O-U-G-H, D-E-N-I-S is his first name, Dennis McDonough, took the president outside of the White House, and they're walking around in the Rose Garden on the grounds of the White House, and had a 45-minute conversation. I thought it was interesting that they dared not talk. First of all, in the White House, they went outside in Rose Garden. I guess that would not be bugged. So I guess the NSA, the assumption would be the NSA does not have any plants out there in those flowers. But the president, here they weren't willing to talk inside the White House, and if they can't trust that the White House is not bugged, and they can't trust their own government that they're the head of, the president of the United States, and Dennis McDonough is the chief of staff of the president, having succeeded James Liu, then you know how I feel about the NSA in terms of whether or not I think they're listening to what we're doing on Facebook and on our phones and things of that sort, our cell phones and our land phones. You can imagine what we're thinking about Big Brother in terms of what they must be doing out here if they're fearful of what may be recorded in the White House. Anyway, they went outside in Rose Garden and walking around, and over a 45-minute period of time, Dennis McDonough convinced the president that rather than taking unilateral military action, particularly in the aftermath of the rebuke and repudiation, that's what it was when England, our staunchest ally in Europe, told this president through their parliament, not through the prime minister, because he wanted to in fact join on to this, but the parliament said no, and I'm sure their constituents were telling them that they were not going to go along with it as well. Plus, they got a problem over there in England with their Muslim population, and it would have probably caused a firestorm over there. So the political correct thing to do was what they did, and that was a rejection of mammoth proportions, and repudiation, as quiet as it's kept by the liberal media, was a repudiation of Obama's leadership, because when America went into war in Iraq with a very convincing case, those buildings being knocked down, everybody saw that, and there was not a hard sell for Bush to put 30 nations behind the efforts to go in and make it clear that whoever knocked those buildings down they were going to be held to account, because the whole world was really, quite frankly, unnerved by it, because if it can happen to the most powerful nation in the world, then what nation on the earth is in fact safe? They were coming out of it out of their own communitarian interest and joining on to Bush, but Bush had to sell it as a war going before the United Nations in order to do it. And this president has singularly refused to go before the United Nations to make his case. And I find that very interesting as well. But anyway, McDonough is out there talking to the president. They come in from the Rose Garden and they decide now to carry before Congress. Well, let's go and look at this guy named Dennis McDonough. When he succeeded James Liu as the chief of staff, although in the Democratic Party and having a lot of baggage in that party, the Republican Party was ecstatic over the appointment. And they were saying that we finally have someone in there that speaks with a straight, voice, whom we can trust and whom we have confidence in. So now let's go back after that Rose Garden and see the person that the Republican Party has said on record has confidence in. He's out in that Rose Garden talking to the president and getting the president to, no doubt, feel at least there's a chance of bringing on board the Republicans so they have a much wider support. They didn't have it internationally. And you can't claim that France is going to do anything. I'm talking about France here, who in World Wars I and II had their arms up in the air and surrendered before the Germans even arrived. I'm talking about France that was defeated by its own slaves in Haiti in a war that began in 1791, and 13 years later, those guys are throwing their hands up in the air and surrendering. In 1804, signing a surrender there, where they were defeated by those they once had incarcerated in Santo Domingo. And this is the France that's on our side, cheering us on, and we think we're going to get some military support from that. All the boots in France will be left on the ground in France. They're not going to be over there in Syria. And they'll say we're not going to put boots on the ground in the United States either. That's supposed to calm the American people that we're not really talking about, a real war. This is a small war. It's only going to be a couple of cruise missiles or two thrown over there, and Damascus will get the message, will calm down, Assad will get rid of his chemical weapons, and we'll live happily ever after. And also, the Tooth Fairy shows up and gives us a quarter on our pillar. So this is very interesting that Dennis McDonough talked to the president and going before Congress. We got to look at that because I think that tells us a lot. And no one has looked at it, but I think we need to look at that in terms of what does that tell us, because I think there's something to be said here. On the one hand, the president was pretty sure he'd be able to hold his own constituency in place in the Democratic Party. Look at Nancy Pelosi, her comments. Look at Dianne Feinstein over in California and what she said. Look at Senator Reid, the majority leader of the Senate. We know what he's going to do. And the president had no reason to believe that his base would, in fact, abandon him almost in anything that he does. He thought that was solidly in place. Now the question is, what does the president have going for him as far as convincing Dennis McDonough, or rather convincing the Republicans through Dennis McDonough of them siding with the president. And I think given the fact that there was all of this stock that was invested in Dennis McDonough by the comments made by the Republican Party, the thought was that if they carried it to the Congress, they got the base in place, and then Dennis McDonough can, in fact, convince the Republicans to also come aboard, because he's speaking with a straight tongue. And there's no doubt about it, if he says anything, then he is, in fact, speaking the truth, which the Republican Party had already endorsed. In fact, they have confidence in him. And I think that's what that conversation is about out there. I think another thing is involved in it that nobody's looked at, and that is, I think this president had no intention of limiting this war. But then if he went into the war in a protracted way and then widened this war to bring about regime change, which I think this is really what this is about, that would have been a hard thing to sell without the endorsement of the Congress of the United States. And then let's understand our Constitution, at least by the way it's being discussed and the way it's being viewed by the more modern way of looking at the Constitution, where you can pass off authority that the Constitution assigns to one branch of government, and you can pass off to another branch of government. So let's look at why the president might have wanted Congress aboard, because what happens is that once Congress is invited into making the decision, its role in the war itself ends at that point of declaring the U.S. is in fact going to war. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, it says that of the 18 powers, really there's 17 powers. 18 clause in Article 1, Section 8 is the necessary and proper clause, which says that do anything necessary and proper to carry out the 17 things that you have ascribed to Congress. In Article 1, Section 8, the first 17 of those clauses found there. So I think that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, once Congress has carried out its mandated role as far as war is concerned in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, then that is the end of it as far as Congress is concerned. They do continue to control the purse strings, which is delegated to the House of Representatives. But in terms of prosecuting the war, once the declaration is made, then the president has the responsibility as the commander-in-chief to, in fact, decide how the war is going to be fought. Congress doesn't have a role in that. So the president could get more authority to do a much larger thing if Congress is in back of it from the beginning, because it gives the president a larger hand in how the war would be prosecuted. You can always say that there were unintended consequences that you didn't foresee, and that's what caused the additional things that you're now doing to bring about what I think is at the very beginning intending to overthrow the Assad regime. And ask yourself this question, those of you who are in the listenership and viewership of FlintTalkRadio.com, why was this president who overthrew Hosni Mubarak and a lesser ally, but one who had posed no danger to the United States in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, Muammar Gaddafi, who as of 1986, under the very staunch and resolute Ronald Reagan, once the nightclub was bombed in Germany, then Reagan took action against Assad, sent bombs even to his Milton address where he was living, had him running around, even staying in tents. He didn't know where the next bomb was coming, but gave up his ambition at that point to be a force out there carrying out radicalism on the world stage because he knew the consequences of that. So he was no longer a threat to the United States. His government was overthrown also. And we overthrew a 30-year ally of the United States in Egypt, who had kept Egypt calm and kept it from being radical, had outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's interesting that the president was one of the ones that undermined an ambassador that had, an ally who had been an ambassador for the United States in the Middle East, calming things down to our benefit and maintaining control over the radical elements in Egypt that we now see rising up today under the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, burning churches, that didn't happen under Hosni Mubarak, it's happening now. Killing Coptic Christians and attacking the Christians that are in Egypt, where the Coptic Christians are some of the oldest Christians in the world. That didn't happen under Mubarak, nor did it happen under his predecessor, Anwar Sadat. And so we now see this coming apart the seams based upon our overthrowing an ally. And to say that we will overthrow both Gaddafi and overthrow Hosni Mubarak, but we leave Assad, who is not an ally in power, makes no sense at all. And it only makes sense in that we are looking at expanding what has happened in Libya and in Egypt, where all of a sudden we see these radicals being put in power. We had secularists in power before that. I think the president has to answer for that and come clean with the president's intent. And I have to tell you something in the viewership that I have said on my wall, and I said unequivocally, and I didn't say it with any kind of hesitancy. I think that what we're looking at here on the federal level, at least in the executive branch of government, is treason. And there's a heavy charge to make. But if treason is impossible, then why did they place treason as one of the actionable charges for impeachment if there is no possibility of it ever happening inside of the government? Why would they put it then in Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution, where they said that the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Treason being the first allegation that can bring about removal of the president from office. So if it's not possible, and the framers did not think that could happen, then why do they put that then in that language in Article 2, Section 4 as the very first part of that which brings about the possible removal of a president of the United States? It says shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Did you see the video of John McCain facing one of his critics at a town hall meeting? And the guy was reading off. He said, if I were, you're treasonous. And the arrogance of McCain in answering him, he goes, well, you could get them off, try and run for office. I've done it 8 times. I guess people are satisfied with what I'm doing. He's so flippant with anybody who makes these charges. Engaging another country in a war that everybody is against, nearly everybody who's got a brain is thinking about. We're not congressmen and senators do this. That is an act of treason.
It is treason, and it's treasonous for particularly in this case here, where you actually are aiding and abetting the people that are fighting in this war that have actually attacked this country and killed American soldiers. How do you then ask the military, which has laws as members to Al Qaeda, how do you then turn around and ask the same military to fight on the side of the Al Qaeda forces that are fighting against Assad? If that's not treasonous, then you might as well take that out of the Article 2, Section 4, and just simply have the president possibly impeached and removed from office for bribery and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Just take treason out of there. But this rises to the level of treason because this president, as quiet as is kept, is installing radical Muslims in the Middle East where they had secularists in place before that. And look at the fact that what we see happening in Syria, where the Muslim Brotherhood burned, by one estimate, 40 churches, another estimate says 60, and they're attacking Christians. Look what they're doing in Syria. John, I don't know if you read this or not. The rebels took over a town last week where the Christians are there, and they still are speaking the language that Jesus spoke back in his day, and they're the only village in Syria that can claim that. And they took that village over, and the Assad government was trying to go in there to root those rebels out because they know what's going to happen. It's going to be a bloodbath. And look at what they did to the priest over there, where they beheaded him, not for siding with the Assad regime. They took his head off, decapitated him because he was Christian. And they're attacking Christians over there in the rebel forces.
But this president is very hostile to Christians.
Very hostile to Christians.
He doesn't have, and it shouldn't become a religious war. I mean, I understand want to keep us on a secular basis, but when you're talking about that part of the world, it's undeniable. There's a large reason why these people are at each other's throats is because of religious differences.
Religious differences explain what the motivation is for them being willing to martyr themselves. I mean, how do you get on planes and fly them to a building like you did on 911, which we're getting ready to celebrate tomorrow? Tomorrow's 911, getting ready to celebrate the attack on the towers where 19 people got on planes. I'm not convinced all of them knew that they were not going to land those planes, but certainly the ones that were piloting those planes, those persons in that cockpit knew that they didn't have any kind of flying aircraft training to land those planes. They took courses in, I think, Florida to learn how to fly the plane, how to guide it, use it as a guided missile. They never took any training in how to land the plane, I think that should have brought some eyebrows up to the ceiling. But those persons got on those planes and incinerated themselves along with their passengers, and they were the first ones to die in the crash that would have occurred. They're sitting right in the cockpit. So that plane going there as a missile, they would have been the first ones that were in fact killed, incinerated in a fire that would have ensued and smashed themselves in those buildings. And how do you get someone to do that? You certainly can't do it by telling them that they should believe in bin Laden. Bin Laden not doing it. And they would require him to show by example that is a way, in fact, to fight this war. We require him to do that. So that's not the motivation for it. The motivation is something very different. And I read the reports. I know what the motivation is for it. It has nothing to do with bin Laden. Because they're doing it now, although bin Laden, according to reports, died when the SEAL Team 6 went in there and took him out of the place where he was staying in Pakistan, and he no longer exists. Some are saying he died even before that, though. And there are some reports that he might have died as early as a decade ago. But I'm going to give the Navy SEAL Team 6 credit for taking him out. But that can't be the motivation for why they would be willing to get on the plane and incinerate themselves and die. The reason for that would be that these persons are fighting a religious war, and they believe that they are going to go to heaven immediately in their martyrdom and have all the rewards. And some of you are aware of what those rewards are said to be. Instantly, wherein if you in fact die and not in defense of Islam, the waiting period is a little bit different. But you immediately go into paradise, and you're there with Allah at that point in time. So that it does have religious implications, and they're essential to why these groups are in fact fighting each other. One interprets the Quran one way, another one interprets it differently, and so there's a war going on there. But all of the persons who are not Muslims are infidels, and so all the Christians can forget about having any peace in a Muslim country and being able to freely practice their religion anytime there is a fundamental Islamic regime that's in power. They were safe under Assad because of Assad's secularism, and they could be used as another one of the barriers in terms of the people being on different sides of the religious question, which protects Assad's regime. So it would be of no value to him to in fact persecute Christians, because he needs that element out there, because if he attacks that group, and then you got these fundamentalists out there as well, he's alienated the Christians, then you got this problem over here because he's not a fundamental Islamic leader, so you got that problem already just by the very definition of what they represent. Then over here you create this problem with these Christians and so on. So that would be something that did not happen under those secularist regimes. We don't have any reports of Anwar Sadat, nor Hosni Mubarak, nor Muammar Gaddafi persecuting Christians. That happened in the aftermath. And don't forget, when we overthrew the Gaddafi regime, we lost 4 American lives in the aftermath of that overthrowing of the president of Libya. You would have thought they would have said, we want to thank the Americans for their involvement in helping us get rid of a dictator that had oppressed us for 30 some odd years. But no, they ended up by thanking us by in fact killing Americans. And it's interesting that this president wants to go into Syria at a time when he's created havoc already in Egypt and has created havoc in Libya, and now wants to go into Syria, where there are people out there in those groups who definitely represent radical Islam. They want an Islamic State in Syria. And that is something that we have to pay a lot of attention to, and listen to the president tomorrow night when he speaks, trying to rally the country behind at least a limited engagement, promise that there be no boots on the ground. It's going to be a limited exchange. We're going to go in there, won't be long, and we won't put in the boots on the ground in Syria. And we're going to make a statement about what Assad had better not do in the future, because we're going to make it clear that he will pay a price for it by what we're going to do once we attack the Syrian nation. They had Rose, Charlie Rose, that went into Damascus to do an interview with Assad. And we need to understand what he's talking about as well. He was talking about, he claimed that Assad was saying that if the United States attacked him, that there's going to be retribution in that attack. It made it appear that Assad was saying that we'll pay a price based upon the Assad regime. You listen to that interview, you find that's not true. What Assad is saying is be very careful in how you, in fact, unleash these terrorists. He said America had better be very smart, because if they get their hands on those chemical weapons that Assad has neither denied nor said that he has, but many people are saying that he has a very large arsenal of chemical weapons that are centrally located and under central command And that right there raised the question whether or not they could have been out of the command place and then used it against those civilians, as is being alleged. He's saying that once they get in the hands of the group that he's fighting against, and these are Muslim extremists, he said, then you will pay a price for that. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying that it won't come from my government. He's saying that it will come from those, if I'm undermined and this government no longer functions and they get their hands on it, then you will not have been smart and you would have installed your very enemies in power that will in fact use weapons against you, because they're not going to start loving you just because you helped them overthrow the Assad regime. Look what happened in Libya. It's just one example of that. So there's a lot of questions to be raised here. And we're going to see if the president's able to move the needle tomorrow when he speaks before the nation. But the American people are not happy about any potential involvement of the United States in Syria. It'll be interesting to see what the president does. I don't think this president has the backbone to go into Syria if Congress says no. I don't see that happening. And I think that the president, if he had to do it all over again, would not have taken what looks like Dennis McDonald's advice and asked the Congress to get involved in the first place. He thought it would be a slam dunk. The president would have more power, go in there and do what he wants to do, which throw Assad out of power. And don't tell me that he didn't have the intent. He threw out our allies.
You know what I think is ironic, too, is we got our troops stretched all over the globe right now. And Charlie Rangel, every time this comes up, Charlie Rangel always wants to reinstate the draft. And now you got women who always want to fight to be combat soldiers. Now, here the irony is, our government's got us convinced so much that this kind of issue is what equality should be about, that people are clamoring to die for a country and conflicts that really don't have anything to do with our own security. Did you ever just sit down and realize all the intensity and all this emotions going on about how women and they want a right to serve in the military in equal roles, and now they're just like clamoring to go die in useless causes? We talk about becoming somewhere like zealots for like the Muslims doing this for the name of Allah. We're doing it for the name of equality. Mm-hmm. We're allowing a larger portion of our population to be, to take it away from civilian production of materials and goods and stuff like that in daily lives. So we're going to have the Democrats have always done this, always sold the American people on this greatness of war. But if it was a Republican doing that, even at a limited basis, they're horrible people who don't care for the working class. Yeah. But the Democrats continuously send more working class kids to war. Mm-hmm. And that's what Chucky Rangel's talking about doing again, is resurrecting the damn draft.
Yeah, Rangel has been pushing this for a while now. If the Ayn Rand's point would be that a free people should not have to have a draft, because if free people will fight for their freedom, and so they don't need motivation, because they understand that what they're fighting for is their own individual sovereignty, without which they will be enslaved, and so therefore you would volunteer to defend your country because you're a free people and you do not want an outside force enslaving you. I know what Rangel is doing, but that's the kind of grandstanding that we've come to expect from this representative from the 15th district in New York. Anything he says, has to be taken with a grain of salt in terms of the motivation. But I'm looking to see what Congress is going to do, because the numbers are not close in terms of what the American people are asking their representatives to do in this case here. They're just adamantly, unequivocally, and loudly rejecting the claim that we should be involved in Syria on any level. And I don't think that the president's going to be able to move the needle. I'm willing to listen to the president tomorrow night and see what he says. But I don't think, or if he speaks, I don't know what time he's going to speak. He may speak in the afternoon, trying to therefore influence how it's reported in the evening news. But there's supposed to be some report the president's doing today at 6 o'clock. I'll be watching that, of course.
Did you also hear, too, that there are some rumors out that I guess Obama said that some Arab nations said that they would actually support the war financially?
Yeah,
so that's basically making our soldiers mercenaries.
Yeah. As long as what the president is saying is that it won't be in expense, because we had a $17 trillion debt. So how can you sell this war if it's going to be another expense added to the burden we already have and paying off a debt that's being put on the back of our grandchildren?
Also, aren't we only feeding our troops in the field right now only one hot meal a day?
Yeah,
The
that's
rest of
what
us
we
are-
do.
And while this man who's the president is traveling all over the damn globe, taking
Yes.
his family and his 2 dogs and all this stuff, these people are only eating one hot meal a day while they're serving in the trenches.
Yeah, and cutting the military budget, which is outrageous.
So this guy's a nut job. I mean, he's nuts.
We
He's
have
nuts.
this man is we have a person that is an enemy combatant in the White House, and we can shave that any way you want to, so it looks like it doesn't look like a duck, but if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it's a duck. And what we have in the White House is that we have an enemy combatant in the White House, and you can see that on all levels. And you can see it. I said this in my post on Facebook also. You can see it when the president took his left hand. He and Michelle were doing it together at a solemn occasion, and took the left hand and placed it over here. I watch the president even when he gets off the president's airline. And Air Force One, I watch him when he passed by the soldier that's down there by the steps of the plane. I see the president doing this. That I just watch him all the time. He's like, almost angry that he has in fact salute this guy, and it shows his venom against the military, even in how he gestures. I mean, isn't that respectful? It's,
And he calls it my
Get outta
military.
here.
He calls it my military.
My military was another thing he did.
No president's ever done that.
Never done that before and said my military. This president has this idea. This is his country too, and he can do with it what he wants to, regardless as to the sentiment of the American people. In fact, that's why I was surprised they went to Congress, because to say it was out of any respect for the separation of powers, that's ludicrous. When you look at the president taking policies that matters into his own hands and everything else, and Congress can simply either accept it or just shut up about it, but he's not going to stop doing what he's doing. I don't buy it, not 1 second, that this was about in respect for the constitutional separation of powers. And he is, in fact, respecting Congress's role as a lawmaking body, which he said that, and this is what Rand Paul was saying, is this a ceremonial thing that's going on here where the president is saying that he will go ahead with it whether Congress agrees with it or not. I don't think this president will have the nerve to do that, but if he does, then we have got to, in fact, move to the next step and bring impeachment charges against this president. And if he does not, in fact, do it, it then could do something else for this country. It could, first of all, get the Congress to begin to re-inject into the political bloodstream the idea that we should have accountability where the check and balance system is put back in place, and each branch must do its role and be jealous of anyone coming across the lines and doing that which is not allowed in the Constitution. We can begin to pull back power in Washington, so they're restraining each other and putting back power where it belongs, which is mainly with the states. So it can have a lot of positive effects if the Congress stands up. And if they don't stand up, then we've got to definitely keep in mind what they did next year, and we got to remove some bodies around. And we have to remove some bodies around anyway, because some of them have been up there for a lifetime, doing nothing but doing us in, and that has got to change. We got about 5 minutes left. Let me go to something else, but keep your eyes on what's happening in Syria, because really we have not proven our case that Assad unleashed chemical weapons on his own people for no military reason and for no strategic purpose. It makes absolutely no sense. And I always ask yourself the question, who benefits when an act is in fact taken in the heat of battle and you see something that's untoward taking place? Then you ask yourself, okay, who are the beneficiaries of that particular action? And it's certainly not the Assad regime, which is in fact whipping the rebels into submission. They are being routed in Syria, and they cannot sustain what is imminent, which is their defeat. And why would Assad then go into bringing other parties into it when he's going to, in fact, prevail at some point in the future? However long that takes is not necessarily known, but we do know how the war is going at this point. And he's actually, he has defeated 90% of the forces that are out there. And he's well on his way to, in fact, restoring order in Syria. So why would he want to bring a third party into it and change the balance of power when he's in fact winning the war? It makes absolutely no sense, and I ain't buying that we didn't go before the UN to lay out our claim because we are fearful of the Russians vetoing the effort. When Russia said, if you in fact put the evidence on the table and convince us that the evidence is real, and the UN, Russia will not veto the proposition. In fact, Russia has said through Vladimir Putin, it is willing to join in the attack on Syria if these weapons of mass destruction were in fact used, because it's in their interest to do it also. They're right there in the back door. So if they will use it on their own people, why would they not use it on foreign countries, which Russia is one of those foreign countries? It makes no sense. And
what about Russia's offer to intervene and say they want Syria to surrender the chemical weapons to them? And actually, Syria seems open to that deal. So, I mean, to me, it just seems like I don't think Obama knows what he's doing. He wants to sort of show that he's got muscle.
Or he has an agenda that he's not telling the American people about. But that is one way of getting out of it. It's interesting how there have been a couple of caveats thrown out there for the American government to take hold of and seize, neither of which has been done. Russia told them also, if you make the case before the United Nations, and the evidence is that this man used these weapons, we're willing to go with you in terms of the attack on the Assad regime, because they're signatories to the accords where you have 92 nations that have signed the non-chemical weapons pact. And so they're willing to enforce it in Russia as they are, here. It's interesting that none of those outreach efforts have been seized by the American government, and that makes me think at least there's an agenda underneath the surface that we're not being told about. Okay, well, we'll talk about this some more. We're going to see what happens tomorrow. Stay tuned, because it ain't over until it's over, and it ain't over yet, and we've got to see where this is going to lead to. But the American people have already spoken. They do not want the U.S. involved in this war. And if Congress goes ahead with it anyway, we've got to make sure that we remember and do not forget that next year we got to turn them out of office anyway. We need to change some people around and not allow anyone to sit up there for a lifetime sitting over the nation's business. Well, the other thing I want to talk about very briefly now, since we're running out of time, was that Ben Jealous, the president of the NAACP, has now announced that he will be resigning on the 31st of December at the end of this year, and will be stepping down to go off and teach at some college, one that's not yet been named. I want to say that his comments were in the line of what he's done as the president of the NAACP. He said that the NAACP has more supporters than it had when it came in. His been fiscally managed very well. Money in his kitty and things of that sort. He didn't say anything about any of the civil rights issues that they should have been taking issue with. Any of the issues that should have been taken on in order to resolve, because quite frankly, no work for the NAACP to be doing as far as civil rights is concerned. It was all about the standing of the organization, the shape is in, had nothing to say about any issues of civil rights. And the reason for that is very clear. There's no role for the NAACP anymore in the United States. And they have become an obsolete, archaic organization, a relic of the past, that has no role to play in anything right now. And how are you going to claim you're going to advance quote unquote, colored people, meaning black people, or African Americans like to be called right now, but better not use that in Africa. But they want to advance black people, and you're talking about advancing them when you got a black man in the White House and you got a black man as Attorney General of the United States. These are two highest officers in the country. And you've had secretaries of state that have been black and were Republicans. So I don't know how you advance them further than going up to the levels of power they've been, unless you're talking about making one of them in the future kings. So Ben Jealous is leaving, and really he should take the organization with him, because the fight today is a different fight than it was back in the time period when the NAACP was founded in 1909. We're now in 2013, and these struggles are very different. We're going to talk about a number of other things here that have nothing to do with civil rights, but with personal responsibility. And if they're not talking about that, then they're not talking about actually serving the needs of people as it relates to what's going on right now. Okay, I guess we are kind of running out of time here. So we will see you next week. I want to thank you again for staying tuned. And don't forget, at 3:30, in about 30 minutes, we'll have Sartorius Black History Corner coming up, and that'll be Miss Catherine Hunter Williams and Miss Catherine Blake. Until then, I want you to follow your dream, Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.